Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Linda Barron, President of the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. We have this workshop scheduled for our restaurant and hospitality industry this morning. No other industry has really had to contend with more than this specific industry in terms of, the phase reopening, all the different requirements and changes, and all of the different regulations, requirements, and the whole myriad of things that have come with that. So today we're going to address indoor dining. I'd like to thank our good friend Andrew Rigie from the Hospitality Alliance for joining us this morning, and Richard Frazer from Pryor Cashman. I'm going to turn the program over to Don Provenzano, who will put in our formal introductions. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our indoor dining webinar. I'm Dom. I'm the marketing manager over at the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce. So as you probably know, the Staten Island Chamber of Commerce, we've been working tirelessly these past 6 months to advocate for businesses affected by the pandemic. And many of our members are probably very well acquainted with my name at this point, and the Chamber's name at this point. I've received many, many questions, but none more than when will indoor dining resume? So as you can imagine, we were very happy when the governor announced that indoor dining could resume next week, September 30th. However, this reopening comes with, some caveats. A 25% capacity limit, and a laundry list of guidelines. So we understand that these guidelines can be overwhelming, and there's a lot of questions. So I'm thrilled to have two guests with us who can clarify some of these lingering questions and provide an overview of what this means for your restaurant and provide guidance on protecting your business moving forward. So first we have Andrew Rigie. He's the Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. The New York City Hospitality Alliance was founded in 2012. They foster the growth and vitality of New York's most vibrant industry, restaurants. And for the last few months, the Alliance has worked tirelessly to fight for our restaurants, pushing politicians to pass legislation to protect restaurants and their workforces. And second, we have Richard Frazer, partner and co-head of the Restaurant, Food, and Beverage Group at Pryor Cashman. And Pryor Cashman is named the #1 mid-sized law firm in New York City for 2 years in a row. And they boast nearly 180 attorneys with offices in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. For more than 2 decades, their Restaurant, Food, and Beverage Group has represented some of the most iconic restaurants in New York City and nationwide. Like the Chamber, Pryor Cashman works alongside the Hospitality Alliance for fighting restaurants big and small. So once again, thank you both for joining us, and we'll conclude this webinar with a Q&A. So please feel free to submit your questions, and if we cannot get to your question, we'll try and reach out to you afterwards on an individual basis. So first, I'll pass it over to Andrew, who can give us an indoor dining and what comes next.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I know, obviously, it's an extremely trying time, particularly for our industry. Just the last 6 months has been unlike anything we could ever imagine, and we really have been fighting around the clock for the future of our industry. Because I continue to say it, and I sound somewhat like a broken record, but I'll say it again, I don't see how the city of New York ever recovers unless our restaurants are really at the core of that recovery. And part of that recovery is going to rely on all levels of government. I should say, not part of, huge part of that recovery is going to rely on all levels of government providing us various types of support to keep going until we can get back to 100% indoor dining. And as many of you know, especially those that operate restaurants, it could often be difficult enough pre-pandemic operating at 100% indoor occupancy to survive. So just having outdoor dining for those restaurants that have had it, if you got PPP, that clearly is not enough to sustain the industry. And as you all know, we had been pushing very, very hard for months now to get indoor dining to restart in New York City. Most of the state had reopened indoor dining at a 50% reduced occupancy since back in June. Thankfully, the infection rate throughout the state had continued to go down. And yes, so what the governor did do was important, although I know people did want to start at 50% just like the rest of the state, was provide a blueprint so at least hopefully people could plan. The blueprint is to get to 50%, hopefully by November 1st, potentially before, if certain benchmarks are made. The two most important ones that were referenced was one, compliance. I know people have a lot of different opinions on it, but most recently, based on the State Liquor Authority inspections, New York City restaurants and bars had been basically 98, 99% compliance with these thousands of inspections that have continued to go on. So one of the benchmarks to get to 50% is compliance. So I urge everyone to do everything they can do, which we know they will, to try to keep track and stay in compliance with all the regulations. We know how extremely difficult it can be, but this is going to be something that's very important. The second metric is going to be the infection rate related to restaurants. We've been hovering now for 30 plus days at or below 1%, which is frankly amazing. And we need to keep it up. So if we can keep that infection rate down and it doesn't really get to 2-3%, then we should be okay. So you can use the compliance and the infection rate to best guide you as to whether or not we'll be able to get to 50% by November 1st, or before. The challenge, frankly, with all of this is that it's subject to, so many different factors. But again, 25% starting September 30th, with the potential to get to 50% on or by November 1st, right around that. The occupancy is 25% based on your certificate of occupancy. And it is exclusive of employees. So if you have a 100-person occupancy, you can have 25 customers plus your employees. If you have a restaurant that's on 2 floors, each floor usually has a separate certificate of occupancy. So it would be 25% of the occupancy for each area that has a C of O. And I said you do not count your employees towards that 25%. For closing time, it is a bit different than the outdoor dining, which is 11 p.m. if you're participating in the city's outdoor dining program. This would allow restaurants to continue to serve food and beverage until midnight, 7 days a week. However, patrons are allowed an additional 30 minutes, basically till 12:30 to finish up, but you can't be serving them after that time. And at 12:30, the establishment must close. Bars, they all have to be closed and converted to service bar only. That means you can't have your customers sitting at the bar or standing by the bar or picking up drinks at the bar. All your service should be seated at tables, subject to those requirements. And I think Rich will probably get into some of that, or we can answer those questions later on. And tables have to be spaced 6 feet apart, similar to the requirements for outdoor dining. However, if 6 feet apart is not feasible, you can erect barriers in between the tables. Those are also subject to some regulations that are found in the requirements. And again, we can touch on that later if people have specific questions. A big one is no masks, no entry. People, employees, and customers need to be wearing masks at all times, except customers when they're sitting at their table, eating and drinking. They do not obviously have to wear a mask. Best practice would be to have customers wearing masks while they're sitting, except for when they're eating and drinking. So not a requirement. You could recommend or have a policy where, asking people when they're placing their order to, continue to wear their mask. And if they get up to go to the restroom, they then need to wear the mask, as well. 2 areas that we've gotten a bunch of questions on, one with temperature taking. According to the CDC, the temperature where you can basically deny entry is 100 and higher than 100.4 degrees, where these new requirements say 100 degrees. We're working to get some clarification to ensure that everything aligns with the federal regulations as well, which is 100.4, and hopefully we will get that guidance. The other area has to do with your air filtration systems. Currently, there's a few different categories. Basically, if you have an air filtration system that can fit MERV 13 filters or better, you need to do that. and have it basically certified by an expert. And they have a list in the requirements of engineers and other HVAC professionals and other types of people that can certify these requirements. If you have an air filtration system, but you cannot use a MERV 13 or greater in the system, you need to get that certified by one of these lists of professionals. And then you have to meet these additional CDC requirements that are listed in the guidelines. And then the third is if you don't have an air filtration system or you don't have access to it, then you just simply have to meet, I don't want to say simply, then you just have to meet the requirements listed in the document. We are seeking some clarification. What I have heard is that to get real MERV 13 or better filters, they are on back order, some places for months. So obviously that poses a challenge significantly if you have a system that takes them. So we would like that if you can't get access to these MERV 13 or greater filters, that you could basically self-certify you can't, and then meet some of the other CDC requirements. Then the second classification would be for those whose systems don't fit MERV 13 or greater system. Instead of having a professional come and certify, it would be to allow some sort of self-certification of the business. Again, there's only, I don't know how many, but there's 25,000 eating and drinking establishments throughout the 5 boroughs. So you can imagine it would be quite difficult for everyone to get someone into their establishment before September 30th to certify that their system doesn't take a MERV 13 and that you are meeting these other requirements. So those are a few of the areas that we're looking into, and I know Rich is going to get into some more of the details on these topics. So I wanted to just give somewhat of a bit high level overview. And a couple other issues really quick, Linda and Dom had asked me to just touch on. One is we will hopefully see the extension of the law passed earlier this year that suspends enforcement of personal liability guarantees and leases. It has been challenged in court. We expect probably sometime this week there will be a ruling on this issue, or whether or not the judge will issue, an injunction. But this law effectively prohibits a landlord from going after someone personally for their assets if they signed a personal liability or a good guy guarantee in their lease. Clearly, when someone signed one of these guarantees in their leases, they could not contemplate that we would be in such a situation where they've effectively been mandated by government to be closed and unable to, pay their rent. So we anticipate that will hopefully be extended, which has been very important. And this week we'll see what the judge's ruling is on the injunction. The second thing, the mayor last week did sign an extension of the fee cap for third-party delivery companies like Grubhub and Seamless, where they can't charge more than 5% for the actual transaction or transmission of an order / marketing, basically being listed on their website. And then if you don't employ your own delivery people or you use some combination thereof, the company cannot charge more than 15% for doing the physical delivery. So if you do your own deliveries and someone just orders through Grubhub or Seamless or one of these companies, it's capped at 5%. There can be an additional 15% if a company is doing the actual physical delivery. And then today, or I say last night, Governor Cuomo also signed or extended his executive order on the moratorium on commercial evictions, another kind of important protection to commercial tenants like restaurants and other small businesses that have been unable to pay their rent because government has shut them down. So that, combined with the personal liability guarantee, gives some sort of protections which are really important, but clearly we need significant support, which really could only come from the federal government in many cases, for rent relief. There's a bill called the Restaurants Act we've been advocating for, which would be a $120 billion grant program that would help restaurants cover their rent, payroll, vendor expenses, utilities, and all these other expenses that have been racking up. There is, however, some bills in the city and state to help with rent relief as well. Last week, participated in a press conference with several elected officials. In essence, what this legislation would do would provide landlords reductions in their property taxes and other types of tax incentives if they forgive a portion of a commercial tenant's rent that they've missed, as well as renegotiate a lease moving forward. And that's a way to try to incentivize both tenants and landlords coming to the table and figuring out a way to forgive rent and restructure their rent and their lease moving forward in these uncertain times. So there are countless other policies out there we've been pushing, but we know, at least for this conversation, the real importance on focusing on indoor dining, getting open at the 25% and trying to get to the 50% as soon as possible. And then hopefully being able to continue to increase that indoor occupancy, because as we know, even with outdoor dining, that was always meant to help offset a reduction in indoor occupancy. It was never meant as a sole way to sustain these restaurants' businesses. And particularly as it starts to get cool out, it's going to be more problematic because people won't want to sit outside, which leads me to my last point is outdoor dining, if you're participating in the city's program, is scheduled to end on October 31st. We are advocating to continue that program and make it permanent. Part of that we also recognize in the cooler months will require people to be able to use heating devices. Currently, you can only use like a hardline natural gas, which is a lengthy process that costs money. You have to go through, Department of Buildings and FDNY, and it's probably not realistic for people to do before the cold weather. I mean, even last night it got a little chilly out if you were sitting outside eating. You can use electric, subject to some requirements, but to allow outdoor dining on a larger scale, the option would be propane heaters, which are currently prohibited, but there are discussions about potentially, and I don't know if it'll happen, potentially allowing them in certain circumstances if you can do it in a safe manner. So we have been pushing, trying to get a decision made on all of this. Unfortunately, here we are mid-September without a specific answer. We need answers because obviously you all need to plan. And if propane or other types of heating devices are allowed, there'll clearly be a rush on them. So people are going to want to try to buy them up as soon as possible. So as soon as there's information, hopefully within the next week or two, we'll certainly let everyone know. But it's something that we've been pushing for hard. I guess I can leave it at that and then turn it over to, I guess, Dom. I don't know if you were going to.
Sure, thanks.
Hang on and then answer some questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we'll save all the questions for the end. I'll push it over to Rich, who can talk a little bit about protecting your business and some of the guidelines.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Linda. So my name is Rich Frazer again. I'm an attorney at a law firm called Pryor Cashman. We're based primarily in Times Square, though we have offices in LA and Miami. I am the co-head of the restaurant, food, and beverage practice. So I live and especially eat and breathe restaurants. I'll try and fill in some of the details, as Andrew said, on the guidelines. Before I do that, I wanted to mention, there are other things that we are helping all of our restaurant clients on. Andrew mentioned the limitation on enforcement on good guy guarantees. Those are being challenged, but in the meantime, it's provided some leverage for us to negotiate lease modifications, rent abatement for our restaurant clients. Sometimes successful, sometimes not, as indicated in a recent survey by the Alliance. We're also making business interruption insurance claims, which again is all in various phases of legislation as well as litigation. But we encourage our restaurant clients to make business interruption insurance claims, even if they have been denied, even if their brokers are telling them that they're not entitled to such insurance because of virus exclusions. Turning to the guidelines, the great news, of course, we got the 25% in no small part due to the Alliance's diplomacy and pressure efforts. And we finally got the governor to see the error of his ways. Having said that, as Andrew mentioned, no bars, no seating at bars, 25% occupancy for now. based on the certificate of occupancy. You need to post the number of patrons allowed once you determine that. You need, as Andrew mentioned, to do temperature screen checks at the door. You also have to gather contact information from your customer. You can do it at the door, or you can do it as part of your electronic reservation system, but we need to obtain contact tracing information for obvious reasons. And you have to maintain that information for a period of 28 days, so that if it turns out that there's an infection from one of your customers, we can turn that information over to the health department on their request. Besides the 6 feet of distance between patrons, you should try, to the extent feasible, to maintain 6 feet distancing, social distancing between employees. Obviously, if you have a small kitchen, that may not be feasible. Andrew mentioned the barriers. The barriers are prescribed to be 5 feet tall, particularly if it's not possible to maintain the 6 feet apart in all directions from the tables. But if you have a 5-foot barrier, that can be in lieu of the 6 feet distancing. Barriers can be plexiglass, I'm sure you've seen. They can even be curtains. Obviously, the barriers should not block fire and emergency exits. Dom had told me that there were several questions in advance of this about events. So on events, meaning, you might have a private party in the restaurant. It's the lesser of the 25% capacity that Andrew already mentioned, or if less, the current social gathering limits, which currently are 50 people or less. So again, it's the lesser of 25% of the capacity based on the certificate of occupancy, or whatever the current social gathering limits are, which I believe are currently 50 people or less. Maximum 10 people at a table. Communal tables can be more than 10, but the various parties have to distance themselves at the communal table by more than 6 feet. Restrooms, obviously, should be frequently disinfected and sanitized and cleaned. There should be masks. There should be provision outside the restrooms for people waiting to get into the restrooms. Signage, again, besides posting the number of people that the capacity allows, there should be the typical signage that you've seen in accordance with various federal, state, and local guidelines. There should be the arrows, which we all now know and love in every establishment, directing foot traffic. Again, DOH, Department of Health signage about, if you're sick, please report it. Everyone should wear masks. Everyone should social distance. By the way, on the compliance front, apparently New York City, our mayor has committed 400 enforcement personnel together with New York State Police Task Force personnel to make sure that we're all doing what we're supposed to be doing. You have to provide your employees with PPE equipment, including masks, at no charge to the employees. Employers are required to fill out and post an employer safety plan, the template of which the state provides you on the New York State COVID-19 website. So you have to have a safety plan in place that also has to be posted and available. The air filtration systems, I think Andrew covered that. I'm going to give a quick lesson on acronyms. So MERV, actually, I don't remember this one. Minimum efficiency repeating something. ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning, which, again, certified professionals from that organization or others, professional licensed New York engineers, professional HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And as an alternative to MERV, perhaps, is also something called HEPA, which are high efficiency particulate air filters. Again, depending on whether you control your filtration or air conditioning system, like central air, you've got to make sure that you comply with these filtration rules. If you have non-central air, there are other potential filtration systems that you can use. And again, the air conditioning, the ventilation should not be pointed at the customers, if possible. Hand hygiene, obviously you should have various stations with hand sanitizer, soap, obviously paper towels, not only in the restrooms, but maybe even at the entrance and at various frequently touched points in the restaurant. Obviously you should be encouraging hand hygiene, more frequent cleaning and disinfection, as I mentioned, in the restrooms or any other high volume traffic areas of the restaurant, including, point of sale. If an employee gets sick, you obviously have to at least initially close off the area of the restaurant that employee typically use, and you have to clean and disinfect before you can reopen that area. Condiments should be single-use containers. You can use containers. I mean, obviously these days, packets of ketchup and mustard, but if you use a condiment, they've got to be frequently cleaned, but single-use containers are preferable. Menus, I think you all know this from outdoor dining, but they should be paper, disposable, and even better if you can have an electronic menu that people can view on their own cell phones. Silverware should be prepackaged, pre-rolled. No unwrapped straws or toothpicks, obviously. You have to screen your employees daily. You have to train your employees. You have to maintain logs of your compliance, both for employees and for patrons. That's pretty much the highlights from the 16 pages of guidance. A lot of it is common sense. As Andrew mentioned, some of it, notwithstanding the fact that you're a stone's throw from New Jersey, or in the case of Queens, which is my borough, don't shoot me. You can cross the border to Long Island, and they don't have, not only have they been open longer, but as Andrew mentioned, they are not subject to this level of compliance. But for my restaurant clients, the 25%, even though disappointing, and hopefully it goes up before November, if the infection rate is down and if there's not a high level of non-compliance. So you guys can help yourselves by trying to stick to these, or more than trying, by sticking to these guidelines. Because again, it's life and death. I know for a lot of you and for many, many of my restaurant clients. But hopefully we'll get to the 50% sooner rather than later, and hopefully all of this will be behind us, because as I've said many times before, on similar webinars that I've given to restaurants, I mean, the restaurant industry is what, for me anyway, makes life worth living. And so this is why I am proud to try and help you, and why the restaurant industry is absolutely critical to New York and life. So with that, I'll go back to Dom or Linda.
Well, thank you both. Thank you so much for joining us. So we have a bunch of questions. So as I had mentioned in the introduction, the number one question that I got the past couple months was, when does indoor dining start? And now the number one question that I'm getting is, when does the capacity increase? So as you noted, Andrew, the goal was November. So do we have a kind of better idea of when the 50% will come? What is the 50% based on? And what are the requirements for the capacity to increase?
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, really, as far as the governor has stated publicly, looking at two metrics, so to speak, to allow it to increase to 50%. One would be compliance. I mean, there's not a specific percentage that would trigger it, but I think, overall, as long as we continue to do what we've been doing with the outdoor dining compliance, then we would, meet that compliance requirement. And then the second one is for, infection rates. And we have been hovering for, I forget what it is, probably close to 40 days now at about 1% in New York City. And so keeping it around there, they always expect as you open up new sectors of the economy, you may see increases. But I think if it doesn't really hit 2% or get between 2 or 3, then we should be good. But hopefully we can still keep it right around 1%. As I mentioned before, the rest of the state's been open since back in June, and the infection rates continue to go down. Clearly that's a good thing. So those are the two metrics: the compliance and infection rate. The governor said publicly November 1st, but they're going to regularly be monitoring it, so it could happen before. My understanding, what I would suspect, is that when we increase to 50%, it'll be the same as the requirement under 25%, which would be 50% of an area's certificate of occupancy. And that would be exclusive of employees. So I think those are kind of what would get us to 50%, and then what 50% would look like. And then I suspect, obviously, anything else could change, but the other types of requirements would stay intact.
Great. So we've also gotten a lot of questions about private parties. So it's kind of a multifaceted question. So are private parties included in the 25% or the group, the 50% limit? And then what are the dancing restrictions in terms of a private event? Are there still dancing restrictions? What can people not do or not do in a private event?
This is Rich. I can take some of that. As I mentioned, events are, even if the entire restaurant has been booked, I think is what you're asking, for a private party or a private event. Yes, it is still subject to the 25% for now capacity rule. In fact, as I said, the lesser of 25% capacity based on the C of O or the current social gathering limits, because we still have limitations on social gathering, even outdoors, which I believe is now currently 50 or less. On dancing, I don't have a specific answer unless you do, Andrew. But it also, I think it depends on whether these are, close family. There seems to be some latitude for family groups, but it seems to me that dancing is probably going to be discouraged as antithetical to social distancing.
Yeah, I would agree. When we talk about, so for private events, it's 25% occupancy or 50 people, whichever is less. But if you're doing this in a restaurant, you are still subject to, the other types of requirements, that this needs to be seated. This is not, not a party, and it's not an event where people are standing around mingling, sitting at a bar. You're still keeping your bar closed per the regulations we discussed earlier. So while it may be kind of an event, it's certainly not kind of the traditional event that we would have thought of pre-pandemic.
Weddings and bar mitzvahs are not exempt.
Yeah.
To say it.
Yes.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yes. Another question is there a time of night that we need to close a curfew? And if there is, what is the reason for that curfew?
Again, as Andrew said, it's midnight. You can't open again until after 5 a.m. Andrew mentioned that there's some grace period if you're there at midnight, you're finishing up. What is the purpose of it? I think, the answer to that is the same purpose as why does New York have a higher level of compliance than their neighbors in Jersey, Long Island, and Westchester. The answer is that the governor is still trying to discourage, presumably due to the density. It's not that he hates New York City or hates the mayor. Maybe he does hate the mayor, but It's the density. It's also a history. When we first got outdoor dining, there was a high incidence. I live in Greenwich Village. There was a high incidence of non-compliance. There's still none. I mean, I'm going to a restaurant, I'm admitting, to eat indoors in Long Island, which is where I've been going for now, for indoor dining, that lost its liquor license last week. Now, Long Island's allowed to have bar seating, but it was so over the top that they lost their liquor license. And again, because of past non-compliance and the sheer density, and by density, I mean the population, particularly, I hate to say it, the younger population, I think that the curfew is an attempt to try to curb in anticipation of non-compliance. Andrew, do you agree?
Yeah, listen, I will kind of give a quick overview and not saying, yeah, I think one of the things about this is that they want to see kind of structured meals, is that the concern is if people are just hanging out late and people are just drinking and they're not eating and sitting, having a structured meal, it leads to behavior, which increases the likelihood of transmission of COVID. And I've heard lots of very, very smart people argue this issue from all different sides. But the reality is that's the requirement right now. I think these are things, hopefully, that could be modified, frankly. I think, if we get open and operating, we have to realize that New York City is a 24/7 city. There are many people that do go out to eat later. There's people that get off their shifts of work at all times and want to go have a meal. And there's people that just want to stay out late and eat. So there's various reasons and arguments of why they limited it to midnight. I would hope, as we kind of continue to open up, that's perhaps something that could then be modified to allow, 24/7 service in a city that is a 24/7 city.
Okay, looks like we have two more questions. So related to what Richard just said about the liquor license. So we got a question that said, can you provide some clarity to SLA actions? Specifically, can the SLA pull a license for non-compliance without proper prior warnings?
Andrew, did you want to take that one, or should I try?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, as far as I know, yes. I mean, they can pull licenses for non-compliance. I don't think there's any formal warning system. As I said, it's a restaurant last week that I'm familiar with, not a client, on Long Island, that had its license pulled because the bar scene was just out of control. As Andrew said, you can't serve at a bar. You can't have people even standing at a bar for the beginning of New York indoor dining. So liquor is, and bars are absolutely, the target of enforcement. So I don't think you get a strike or two strikes. If an inspector, again, you're not allowed to serve at a bar or even stand. The bar should just be now a prep area for serving food or for serving drinks at the tables.
Andrew, would you agree with that? Does that sound?
I can go back and kind of confirm some more details, but if you're in violation, so you should have due process, of course. But if you are, in some major violation of the laws, then they can, pull a license, or stop your operations. You would want you to obviously have due process, but there's not a specific number, so to speak, of violations.
Right.
Pull it. There is a system in which, they're looking at various violations. So if it's a more minor violation, they may not just come and pull a license, but if there's multiple violations or some real gross violations, certainly they have a lot of authority to, stop that behavior at the establishment.
Right. Okay. And final question is regarding employee PPE. Do you need to provide for kitchen staff or for table servers? So I guess PPE, masks, hand sanitizer.
Yeah, you have to provide employees with all masks, gloves. If the job would typically require gloves, must be provided to the employees by the employer at no cost to the employees. And again, a lot of the rules that apply to patrons, which I may not have mentioned, I mean, you have to screen your employees daily. You have to train your employees now as to the proper adherence and guidelines that we just discussed. And you have to maintain logs of what's been going on, particularly if an employee, calls in sick or God forbid, is found to have an infection, and you have to do the same screening, temperature and otherwise, with the employees.
And it looks like we got.
And wherever possible, you should have the employees social distance. Although I think the guidelines appreciate that, if you have a 5 by 5 foot kitchen, that's not feasible.
Right. And I will remind the viewers that the chamber actually has free face masks. So if you are in need of face masks, just reach out and we'll drop them off. And it looks like we got one last question. So is there any indication from government officials regarding the increase of the social gathering limit? And is it the restaurant owner's responsibility to limit that head count? What is the restaurant's responsibility versus the government's responsibility?
Well, again, I think the social gathering guidelines, Andrew confirmed, is currently 50 or less. And again, when you have private events, just remember it could even be less than the 50, depending on whether the 25% capacity is less. And for a private event, if the gathering limit, currently 50, is less, that's your limit.
Is there any indication of when that gathering limit will increase?
I don't have that.
No. Okay.
But it's obviously the business owner, the business's responsibility to ensure, compliance. And, we understand that can often be something difficult, especially if it is some sort of family or some sort of special gathering where people arrive and, the occupancy could be exceeded because they want to let their cousins come in, or, this is my mother-in-law's great friend, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, all of these requirements are on the backs of the business owners to comply with.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention in terms of accountability, which I think was really the crux of that question. So the guidelines define responsible parties to be either or the owner, an operator, because oftentimes owners don't necessarily operate their restaurants, or the operator can delegate, especially some of these compliance requirements, they can delegate that to a third person. But owner, operators, or designated delegated third parties are, quote, the responsible persons who are accountable to the state for complying with these guidelines.
Okay, and we got one last minute question, and then we'll wrap up. Regarding employee screening, is there an app? How do the restaurants make sure that their employees are COVID-free?
Well, again, it's screening, it's questionnaires. Obviously, you have to encourage your employees to not come to the job sick. Again, signage is very important. The signage is not just for patrons; it's for employees too. Temperature checks, obviously, for employees daily. They have to wear masks, and again, maintaining records that you've actually complied with this as part of the safety plan.
Looks like Andrew.
We have a memo that we had put out some time ago. Maybe I could pull it up and share with you just about the employee requirements. I know there are technology platforms out there right now that can potentially help with some of this. I think like Harry.com has one, maybe 7. There's a couple of different kind of restaurant-related technology companies that help with hiring and employee-related software pre-pandemic that have pivoted a bit and now introduced, programs to help with all of this tracking. So if you currently use some sort of HR software or speak with your payroll company, they may have something as well. But there definitely are some programs out there on the market.
There's a couple of restaurants who established a not-for-profit. Andrew, you're probably more familiar than I. Safety Eats,
Mhm.
is that what it's called?
Correct.
Which for a subscription fee, relatively small, I think, will help you and also provide you with sort of, again, a template that if you subscribe and you pass and you do what they are advising you, which presumably is is consistent with the guidelines, you will get. It's not a government certification, but you'll get a certification that you can hang in the window. It's sort of like the the AAA, that you have in fact complied with their suggested guidelines, which I think are probably also somewhat electronic. So Safety Eats is something that was recommended to me.
The website is safeeats.org.
Thank you.
And they have different resources. I think it's relatively inexpensive, but they've partnered with a company called 0 Hour Health, and it helps provide different resources on compliance to businesses. I think there's also, if you sign up, there's like a 24/7 live clinical support with medical professionals. It allows for digital employee health checks, and it's kind of a single source for all health and safety guidance. Definitely something worth looking into. Just pulling it up. I think, yeah, it's about like $70 a month. And I know obviously everyone's kind of strapped for money right now, but perhaps something worth looking into so you kind of have more real-time information and guidance and answers.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. If there are any other questions that any attendees have, feel free to send me an email and we'll try best to get back to you. So wanted to say thank you both again for joining us, and everybody enjoy indoor dining.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.